Sometimes inspiration begins very early in life. At just 10 years old, Shimazu Yumi watched a television program about Okinawa, a place known for extraordinary longevity. That moment stayed with her. She didn't adopt extreme diets. She didn't follow trends. She simply followed consistent habits. Hara Hachi Bu, eating until about 80% full. Choosing whole traditional foods. Walking daily. Ending the day with warm baths and early sleep. These were not complicated. They were cultural. They were sustainable. And then, 30 years later, one question remained. Was that cultural wisdom supported by science? To answer Shimazu Yumi's question, we turn to the Okinawa centenarian study. This long-running research project, ongoing since 1975, followed thousands of elderly Okinawans. Researchers examine heart disease, cancer rates, disability and independence, metabolic markers, and daily lifestyle patterns. In other words, they studied whether culture translated into measurable health outcomes. What did the researchers observe? Historically, traditional Okinawans had very low obesity rates. They experienced lower coronary heart disease compared to Western populations. Certain cancers were less common. There was a high proportion of centenarians. And importantly, they enjoyed longer health span, not just longer lifespan. This suggests that longevity was accompanied by preserved function and independence. These patterns did not appear random. One of the most interesting findings relates to metabolism and aging. Traditional, older Okinawans showed lower fasting insulin levels. They preserved insulin sensitivity. They accumulated less visceral fat. Longevity appeared linked to long-term metabolic stability. In other words, insulin signaling remained controlled into older age. And that may be one of the quiet drivers of their health span. Not extreme dieting, not miracle genetics, not steady metabolic balance over decades. There is a common claim that Okinawans had very high cholesterol, sometimes quoted as 8 or 9 millimoles per liter. However, long-term data tell a different story. Traditional Okinawans had lower total cholesterol than many Western populations. LDL cholesterol levels were lower. Saturated fat intake was low, and coronary heart disease rates were low. Longevity was not explained by high cholesterol. It appears more closely linked to long-term metabolic balance. This distinction matters. Protection likely came from something much more consistent. Low lifetime exposure to LDL cholesterol. Lower insulin signaling. Low visceral fat. A whole food dietary pattern. Daily movement. In other words, long-term metabolic balance. High cholesterol does not explain Okinawan longevity. Metabolic stability over decades likely does. And that's a very different message. If high cholesterol does not explain it, what does? It was not one lab number, it was a lifestyle pattern. Over time, Okinawa became more westernized. Processed food consumption increased. Fast food became more common. Obesity rates rose. Type 2 diabetes increased. But genetics did not change. Lifestyle did. That contrast is important. The same population, different environment, different outcomes. This suggests that culture and daily habits may matter more than inherited genes. Yumi, you were right. The wisdom you followed as a child, inspired by that television program, has been supported by decades of scientific research. The Okinawa Centenarian study confirmed what tradition already knew. Eat what your grandparents ate. Whole food. Moderate portions. Daily movement. Early sleep. Purpose in life. Sometimes culture carries truths long before science explains them. Thank you for giving the opportunity for us to research and find out the truth about longevity.